Welcome to Monday Night Live, the YouTube show all about Notre Dame football from the staff at Inside ND Sports and the Rivals Network. That's the best thing that you'll experience on Cyber Monday beyond our subscription special. More on that a little later. I'm Eric Hansen. He's Tyler James. Our recruiting writer, Kyle Kelly, isn't trapped like we are in one of these Brady Bunch boxes, but he is getting ahead of the curve on the latest recruiting developments, and there are a bunch of them. Meanwhile, Tyler and I tonight will break down Notre Dame's 38-27 loss to USC. We'll also spin it forward into what it means in the big picture of the postseason and beyond. And we'll take your questions. That segment is coming up soon, so start filling up the question portal.
Yeah, and for those who aren't aware of how to do that, you can either do that below if you're on a mobile device in the chat box, or you can do that to the right hand side of the screen if you're on a desktop and on the YouTube site. If you aren't on the site, make sure you've clicked through. If you're on a link, whether it's on social media or on our message board or on InsideNDSports.com, make sure that you are clicked through and able to get to the YouTube site or app in order to be able to submit your questions, and then we can get them from there. I've also in the comments there pinned our Inside ND Sports promotion for Cyber Monday. If you sign up by midnight tonight for new subscribers, you can get a full year of Inside ND Sports for just $22. The promo code is Rivals22. And if you follow that link there in the comments, you'll be able to sign up for a full year of us for just $22. So that's quite the deal. And we'd like to have you join us on board and get access to all of our coverage and share some thoughts with us on the entire lounge as well. So go ahead and send us some questions. And in the meantime, we will start going through some headlines that Eric deemed for himself today, since we didn't have Marcus Freeman's annual or weekly press conference today following a game. And that's not so surprised after the last game of the season. There usually isn't a Monday press conference. So Eric came up with some headlines of his own. So Eric, what is your first headline post USC?
Well, in my own press conference I had for myself, the first headline is "The Portal Tsunami is Coming." And you've seen, kind of a trickle up to this point. That's because for the first time, the first year that they're doing this, they're having designated windows when underclassmen especially can jump into the portal. Grad transfers can really do it anytime, and that's why you've seen guys like Jacob Lacey and Joe Wilkins submit their names in there from Notre Dame and some other people too. But the window will start a week from today, so next Monday. It extends 45 days to January 18th. Andy's second semester, by the way, starts January 17th. And then there's another one in May that runs May 1st through May 15th. If you're an underclassman that wants to have immediate eligibility, you need to submit your name during those windows. Now, you can transfer anytime. You can pick your school at any time, but those are the times. And because of this new window, Tyler, I think that it's going to put pressure on some kids at different schools, and including Notre Dame, to maybe jump in there a little bit early and opt out of bowl games. We've already seen a lot of opt-outs, although in the last couple of seasons, those have been also affected by COVID conditions, even though, last year wasn't as COVID-y as 2020 when there was no vaccines. There were teams that missed bowl games entirely. I think Wake Forest did because of COVID. So, Notre Dame's going to be shopping, and their own players are going to be lining up the kids that want to get new destinations. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, it'll certainly be plenty to track. I think this time of year is the activity and discussions, I think, will be centered around that more than they are football. Usually, I mean, it's just sort of the way things have progressed. It's not just recruiting; it's roster to roster recruiting, not just high school recruiting. So I think we'll see some movement there, whether it's guys leaving Notre Dame or guys coming to Notre Dame. I think that I mean, Notre Dame's always had transfers out, and they've last offseason was a pretty busy season for guys transferring out, and I'm not exactly sure what that'll look like this season. I think that this offseason, I suppose, that there are a number of guys that seemingly, and not a huge number, but there's some guys that have fallen low on the depth chart, and it's not necessarily clear what their futures would be in the program. And so, because they have this opportunity in the transfer portal to play immediately elsewhere, that could be attractive. But I still think there's going to be lots of kids that just don't want to leave Notre Dame until they graduate. They came to Notre Dame to graduate. So I don't. It makes it a little bit trickier for Notre Dame. It's harder to oversign and get a bunch of freshmen in and just anticipate losing against a bunch of guys in the transfer portal, because there will be a lot of guys that don't want to leave. They want to stay here and graduate. And that makes it a little bit different than maybe at some other schools that the recruits may have not picked the school specifically to come to graduate, whereas that's a high priority for many Notre Dame players. So obviously, in terms of when we're talking about what Notre Dame is looking for in the transfer portal market, what are the position groups that you think Notre Dame should be looking to address in the transfer portal, Eric?
Well, the first one that I mentioned is going to get a big duh, and that's quarterback. I believe Notre Dame needs to be active in shopping there and thinking very hard about bringing in a quarterback who can compete for a starting job. You can't promise that guy the job, and certainly we can see a lot of examples in last year's transfer class where there are even 5-star guys that either couldn't hold on to the job or never got it at their new school. But I think Notre Dame needs the competition. They need an experienced guy. So we're talking about somebody that would be a grad transfer for 1 year. We're not looking for somebody to stick around, just like Jack Cohn did. Beyond that, now that we've gotten through 12 games and really kind of see how the depth is stacking up and who's coming back and likely who's not, I think if Justin Adamalola is not coming back, Notre Dame definitely needs to look at an edge pass rusher. And maybe even if he is coming back, I think, just at least to browse through the options there. If you can get an elite guy, because Notre Dame likes to rotate a lot. I think Jordan Botello is going to be in the mix there, but I think you need more than him. Then a couple other positions, I think, you have some young cornerbacks and Jaden Mickey and Ben Morrison that they feel good about, with Tariq Bracy and supposedly Cam Hart leaving. Do you have enough in that sophomore class to build some really good depth? There's 2 very good freshmen coming in, but I think I would take a look at an experienced corner who could start, especially if you can get somebody that's like Tariq Bracy, who's out of eligibility. A nickel guy, I think that would be a plus. And really, if you realistically look at the safeties, if Brandon Joseph doesn't make a U-turn and come back, I think you may need to get another safety. As much as they like to rotate their safeties, you think about Xavier Watts and Ramon Henderson probably being the starters next year. And then you're looking at Justin Walters and some freshmen. And if Peyton Bowen ends up coming to Notre Dame, I think he's a guy that could get in the mix as a true freshman. I'm not sure about those other 2 guys as freshmen. So maybe a 4th safety that could be a rotational guy. How about you, Tyler?
Yeah, I don't know how high on the list I would put safety. I would see what you have in your, like, I've always liked Justin Walters. I don't know if he would be
what I've seen him in practice.
If he would be in position to be the 3rd safety next season if they don't make any additions next year, and if one of the freshmen aren't ready to go. But certainly if you sign Peyton Bowen and Adon Schuler and Ben Minnick, you'd like to think at least one of those guys would be ready to contribute as freshmen. I know that's a lot to ask, but Notre Dame isn't afraid to play young defensive backs, and you would think that could be a potential there. Obviously, quarterback is the biggest position of need in my opinion. You need to bring in a grad transfer, someone to compete for the starting position there. Maybe it's an undergrad transfer, but that seems less likely, especially given the youth at the position that you have with a Tyler Buckner, and then obviously guys coming in and Steve Angeli, and then Kenny Minchie, and then CJ Carr in the future. So I think that's top priority. The Viper end position, I think, is something that Notre Dame needs to consider in terms of the transfer. And then wide receiver, you got to get the wide receiver depth up and even bring in a guy that can play right away. I don't know that you need to even if Notre Dame's wide receivers continue to develop, and we saw some good things from Deion Colsey late in the season, we still believe Lorenzo Styles is a much better player than he played this past season. And Tobias Merriweather will be healthy next year after dealing with a concussion at the end of this season. So Jaden Thomas got a lot of experience this year, but you can rotate guys to receivers. So even if you bring in another guy, it's not like the opportunities will be significantly limited for some of those other players. And hopefully you can pass the football more consistently and better than Notre Dame was able to do this past season. So those are the biggest areas of concern from my point of view. And it'll be sort of fascinating to see what options exist for Notre Dame, and then which of those options are interested in coming to Notre Dame.
Right. And remember, you're not going to have Michael Mayer on this team next year. So there's going to be more opportunities for the wide receivers conceivably to catch the ball than number 87. And I think that they feel very good about Mitchell Evans and Eli Reardon eventually, and really Holden Stays eventually evolving into pretty prolific pass catching tight ends, but we didn't get a chance to see that this year. So there's a real opportunity for the wide receivers. All right,
yeah.
The other thing to remind people of the transfer portal is to get grad transfers into Notre Dame is pretty easy. When you start to get into the underclassmen, especially a guy that's going to be a junior or going to be a senior, it's very difficult with the transfer credits. And there's a lot of work going on between the athletic department and the deans of the different colleges to try to figure out a way, if there's an elite student, to make those transfer credits work a little bit better, because it's not that the people don't have the grades. It's because Notre Dame is pretty persnickety about what goes as a transfer credit to their university.
Yeah, and that's something that's probably going to have to be solved beyond just this transfer window here. Those are ongoing discussions that Notre Dame's going to have to address. But I think that is something that Notre Dame has to be realistic about, in terms of knowing that if it's not going to be able to get those kinds of students into Notre Dame as transfers, that it's going to seriously hinder its ability to do what other programs are doing. Notre Dame probably wasn't going to be able to get a Caleb Williams into Notre Dame. I'm not sure that was even a possibility. I don't know that was ever looked into in any serious sort of way. But I would have my doubts that Notre Dame would be able to make a freshman quarterback, a quarterback who's a freshman somewhere else, to come to Notre Dame. And until I see it, I mean, they can do that. It's not like it's never been done before in some of the other athletic programs, but it's just not something that's commonplace at Notre Dame. So that is something that Notre Dame really needs to address moving forward. All right, Eric, what is your second headline from today?
My second headline is the QB question should top bowl prep priorities. There's a lot on Marcus Freeman's plate. It's different than last year, where he really had to zoom in on recruiting and saving that recruiting class, and then also kind of figuring out how he was going to coach a bowl game with less than a full staff, a lot of people in new roles. And there's a lot still on this year with bowl priorities, but I think you have to really start thinking about the 2023 quarterback as you do your bowl preps. And here's what I mean by that. If you don't bring in a transfer quarterback and everybody stays, you're going to have 5 people trying to get reps in the spring, including early enrollee Kenny Minchie. If you bring in a transfer quarterback, then that number becomes 6. When you think about it, there have been years when there's a quarterback competition where the number 3 quarterbacks had trouble getting meaningful reps. So I think you really need to look at a couple things during bowl prep. We know what Drew Pine can and can't do. And he certainly needs the practice reps to play in the bowl game. But you need to look at Steve Angeli in those bowl practices and see what you have there, because he may not get that opportunity to show himself in the spring. The other one is Tyler Buckner, and we'll find out probably this weekend what his availability is for the bowl practices. And if he is available, I'm not saying start that competition in December for number 1. I'm saying, see how well recovered he is. See if there was any development that went on, missing 10 starts. Because, again, that's going to affect whether Notre Dame wants to bring in a transfer quarterback. I can probably hear a lot of you throwing things at the computer screen saying, of course they need to. And I would say that too, but they didn't feel that last year. And so it's not automatic. And I think you need to bring in a quarterback that can compete in the spring. I don't think, like last year, if they were going to do it, they were going to wait until May to make that decision. They can't do that this year. If they're going to make that plunge, they need to have somebody that can be here in the spring and learn the system.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, it would be interesting to see maybe there are some guys that have lingering issues or injuries coming off this past season that would prevent them from maybe practicing as much as you'd like to get them in the spring. And would that eliminate them from your consideration? I don't know. I think if it's someone you think is talented enough, then I think it would probably still be worth sort of making that plunge, even if those guys can't practice in the spring. You're going to get Tyler Buckner back and able to practice through the spring. And obviously Drew Pine and Steve Angeli are on campus and here and ready to go. And Kenny Minchie plans to get here too, although I'm not sure what his shoulder situation will be in terms of his ability to compete in spring practice. We'll have to see where things are at and what Notre Dame thinks of his shoulder issues he's had.
Preliminarily, and that changes sometimes when the Notre Dame doctors get their hands on them, but preliminarily, I think he wants to play in one of those postseason all-star games in January, but we'll see if that's the case. Because again, there's kids that get here. Dalen Hayes was one. Billy Schrouth was one that had a high school injury, and they go, you need surgery or you need some rehab time. So that could very well be the case.
Yeah. So I think obviously before we get there, Notre Dame's got a bowl to prepare for and what that looks like. I mean, I think Notre Dame needs to do everything within its capabilities in terms of preparing a quarterback to win that game. Right. That's likely Drew Pine. Whether or not Tyler Buckner can find some sort of role in there is still to be determined. And then what comes of Steve Angeli's role in there? I would be surprised if there's much of a role in there unless it's some sort of a blowout. He's just not a different quarterback than Drew Pine, other than like his physical measurements are different, but I don't know that they're different quarterbacks and what their skill sets are necessarily. So I just wouldn't anticipate seeing like a 2 QB system with Drew Pine and Steve Angeli. Right. I don't know that there's going to give you different enough things that it'd be worth doing that. And to Drew Pine's credit, he played well against USC. I mean, he had 2 costly turnovers. One, the fumble, I thought was the one that was the most costly. I thought towards the end, you're just trying to come back, and it was still a winnable game at that point, but Notre Dame was asking, in my opinion, Drew Pine to have to do too much at that point. And for him to be able to continue at such a successful rate that he had been playing seemed not very likely, given the way that USC's defense creates turnovers as well. So, but the fumble was totally within his control, and the interception was too. That was a forced throw, but the fumble was bad and really hurt Notre Dame's momentum and chance of getting back in that game. So, it's going to be interesting.
Fourth down, turning it over on downs. That wasn't Drew Pine, but that was costly too.
Yeah, for sure. You can blame the quarterback position if you want, because Mitchell Evans was at the quarterback position for his quarterback sneak that didn't work on 4th and 1. All right, Eric,
Right.
go ahead.
No, you're probably going to say what's headline
Yeah,
number 3. We
what's
probably should move on because I could talk about the quarterback thing all night.
yeah, what is your next headline you'd want to talk about beyond the quarterbacks?
And it would be bowl options ahead of Sunday announcement. And so ESPN on Sunday will have a 4-hour show where they do the college football playoff final rankings. I think they do the top 6 first, and then they show the other ones a little bit later on. You get the playoff pairings, you get the New Year's Six pairings, and then eventually they'll get around to the other bowls. Now, Notre Dame it'll probably leak out before Sunday because there's really 3 options, and it's the Gator Bowl in Jacksonville, the Cheez-It Bowl in Orlando, Florida, and the Holiday Bowl in San Diego. And they're all in late December, between December 28th and December 30th. The Gator Bowl, you would play an SEC team, so think Mississippi State or South Carolina. The Cheez-It Bowl, you would play a Big 12 team right now. That kind of lines up to be a 7-5 Texas Tech team, which I think that's kind of a lose-lose situation. The Holiday Bowl could be somebody pretty decent like Oregon. So you'd play a pretty high Pac-12 team at the Holiday Bowl. I think there's a lot of people that think it's going to end up being the Gator Bowl. They'd love to see it be LSU. It would take a lot of political moving around to get LSU to fall that far in the SEC pecking order to line up with Notre Dame. The Gator Bowl would have to have a lot of pull to do that, but Texas A&M's upset of
The Gator Bowl should just start printing checks and say, "Hey, come on, just let us have it, please."
just let us have it. I think Mississippi State would be a good matchup for Notre Dame. I think people would be more fired up about South Carolina, given how strong they finished the end of the season. They have a transfer portal quarterback and Spencer Rattler, who really has been not that good most of the season and has really come on at the end. So just your thoughts on the bowl options, Tyler.
Yeah, I mean, you're the bowl expert between the two of us, and so going to Florida or California for myself would be fine either way. I'd like to go to San Diego over the Florida locations, but I'm just sort of interested. Like, the bowl is an interesting proposition for Notre Dame, because I don't know like what it means. Like, I think a lot of times we look at bowls as like having greater meanings than probably they should. And I'm not sure what greater meaning there would be to even get from a bowl for Notre Dame this year, because it's not going to be against a major opponent. I don't know what it will tell us about next year's team. Obviously it's just
I think Oregon would be, but you would have to assume that you're going to have everybody's best players. And that's the problem,
right?
Is if you're missing star players and disproportionately from one team or the other, then you really don't learn a lot.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how that sort of pans out, and what in addition to what teams are being matched up, what is the composition of the teams that are going against each other by the time those bowls are played, because certainly the trend has been for top players in the NFL draft to sit out, and we'll see. Notre Dame would seem to have guys in that range that could be making a decision like that. I think it's a little bit reckless to speculate if a guy would or wouldn't do that. I think that's up to the player himself, and it's not for me to say whether he should or shouldn't do that, and sort of suggest that is something. And we don't even know if that's something they're considering. They could say, no, I'm playing no matter what. And so I think it's a little bit unfair sometimes to assume that a guy is considering sitting out until he tells us that he is considering sitting out. So I think it's always good to sort of measure yourself up against an SEC team, even if it's not one of the top SEC teams this season. You'd like to see Notre Dame's defense be able to bounce back and have a better performance than it did against USC. Certainly, whoever Notre Dame plays against won't have Caleb Williams there. If the matchup is South Carolina, it will be someone who was beaten out that lost his spot and ended up leaving Oklahoma because of Caleb Williams and Spencer Rattler, the quarterback. So I think there's certainly some intriguing matchups there, and maybe in some storylines. And I'm sure we'll come up with plenty to cover with it. But now it's just we're waiting until Sunday until we get word of what those possibilities will be. All
Okay,
right.
before I do the next headline, I've got a comment. So on Twitter, there's a guy NWI Irish 96 and says he's watching us on the live stream, and my wife insists Tyler and Eric are the same guy 20 years apart. Well, first of all, Tyler then is going to get shorted. He's going to have to shrink in height because I think we're about 6 inches different in height. The other thing is, God bless your wife for thinking that I'm only 20 years older than Tyler. Tyler is actually the exact same age, give or take 3 weeks, as my oldest son. So for me to be 20 years older than Tyler is such a compliment. So I appreciate that.
I mean, Eric is in the similar age range as my own father, so it's kind of funny when people are like, "Are you guys you guys look like you're related?" I was like, "No, but he is like my dad's age, and we get along well like family, so that works out as well." So,
and my son was born. Both my sons were born in LaPorte Hospital. Tyler wasn't born there, but he grew up there, so there wasn't a baby switch at the last one.
All right, Eric, what is your fourth headline for today?
Other bowl priorities, and the boring ones are how to work around final exams, which are December 12th through the 16th, and when to give the players a Christmas break. It may have to be a little bit earlier than actual Christmas, depending on which one of those bowls they end up with, whether it's the 28th or the 30th. But I think the biggest priority, besides figuring out the whole quarterback thing, is how much time to give developmental players. And there have been times, in just studying Brian Kelly, and Charlie did this too, Charlie Weiss, but especially Brian, where he had either periods or entire practices dedicated to players that probably weren't going to play in the game. So we're talking about guys like Nolan Ziegler and Joshua Burnham on defense, and Billy Schrouth, and some of those guys on offense, Jabron Payne, and giving them some valuable practice reps that they haven't been getting during the season. Maybe they've been on scout team, and or you want to look at somebody at a different position. And I think this is a bowl game experience. Again, you're not in a New Year's Six bowl. You're not in a playoff, where I think you need to make some time for that. How much you want to do that is another thing. But you've got guys like Jalen Sneed that are kind of coming on like gangbusters at the end of the season. And if you can get him to the point where he is a functional linebacker next year and in either your rotation or pushing for serious playing time, I think you want, because he's different than the Rovers that have been playing this year. He's a guy that I think has a skill set where you can play less nickel, and playing less nickel is good for Notre Dame against certain opponents.
Yeah, the linebacker position in general, I think there's a lot of interesting options there with, we already saw Joshua Burnham essentially move down to the Viper defensive end position in his freshman year. We saw junior Tui Halamaka actually play in a game as a Viper this season against Syracuse. And so what does the future look like for those guys? We have Nolan Ziegler, who we haven't seen contribute in any meaningful way this season. Where's he at? What can he do? What's his position future look like? And these are all things that I think Notre Dame can work on. And they have a better idea of the answer to those questions than we do, just based on stuff that has happened through the season. But I think they can learn more things about those players early on during this bowl process, and getting some practices in, and getting them in some competitive situations. So there are lots of different ways that Notre Dame can handle that. I think it sort of gives you, I think it sort of goes hand in hand with knowing what you need to address in the transfer portal when you see what you have from your young guys and whether or not those guys can compete next season. Because I think generally when Notre Dame goes to the transfer portal, it's going to be looking to bring in guys that would be playing next year, not someone that they're going to bring in here to develop for a couple of years and then have them play. So I think that Marcus Freeman, it's probably going to feel a lot different in terms of bowl preparation for him this year than it was last year. He had all kinds of things he was sorting through in terms of just figuring out how to be a head coach, and now he's got the experience under his belt of being a head coach this season, and now can sort of do some bigger picture things and use this bowl preparation to put Notre Dame in a better position going into the offseason. All right, Eric, what's your fifth headline before we get to some questions that our viewers have submitted to us?
Well, recruiting reset. There's the early signing window opens up on December 21st and closes at the end of the business day at December 23rd. And Notre Dame right now has 25 commitments. The 25th commitment was a flip from another class. It was offensive lineman Chris Tarrick from Wisconsin. He will not be an early enrollee, but most of Notre Dame's class is. I'd say 2/3 of them are. What's left? Notre Dame is still not only trying to keep what they have, they're trying to add to it. So we're looking at a wide receiver, and I think the top options are Caleb Smith and Khalil Barnes. And then there's a hybrid offensive defensive prospect in Brandon Hillman, who's going to make a decision soon. Notre Dame would like to add him to the class, so we're probably looking at 27. If somehow a defensive end, a elite edge player fell into their lap, they would love that too, but there doesn't appear to be that on the horizon. And Tyler's a little bit more plugged into the nuances of recruiting, so I'll let him jabber a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would make that argument based off of the recap you gave us there. I think you laid out everything pretty much as it is.
When it gets down to 2 or 3 guys, I'm pretty good.
Yeah, we got the list short enough for you to be able to handle it. But yeah, I mean, I don't expect a lot of surprises. I think maybe there's a guy or two that Notre Dame's been sort of looking into that maybe makes a late push for, but I think Notre Dame has pretty much showed its cards in terms of who it's prioritizing down the stretch, and the positions that it is looking for help. The Viper position, I just think, is going to be something that's looked to be addressed in the transfer portal rather than this recruiting class. I know someone on Twitter earlier today asked, "Is Keon Keeley going to end up in the class?" And I think even wanted a percentage, and I guess I would put that at like 2%. I don't see that happening unless there's a major change of heart there and change of weight. I don't know that Keon Keeley in Notre Dame has been a realistic destination for him in quite some time. So I think he visited Alabama this past weekend. So he will probably end up at either Alabama or Ohio State and not back in Notre Dame's class, even though he was one of the first in the class back when Notre Dame's 2023 class started, not this past summer, but the summer before that. So Notre Dame's got a really good class. I mean, the quarterback was the biggest need, and getting Kenny Minchey in the class was a big boost for Notre Dame, and that was the biggest glaring hole. And so I think Notre Dame's just sort of adding some depth at this point in the recruiting cycle. It has most of those needs addressed. The Viper one is probably the biggest hole, I would say, left. I just don't see that there's going to be an answer there. Notre Dame just lost out on the guy I wanted in Keon Keeley, and I don't know that there's a long list of guys that Notre Dame saw as guys worth going after at that Rover or Viper position, and then the guys that they did want to, that there just wasn't a match in terms of those guys wanting to come to Notre Dame. So I don't know that there will be an addition there unless there's some things that are going on behind the scenes and kept low key into the signing period, which you never know. Some things like that can happen. And then the other one, this question just came in, so we'll address it since we're talking about recruiting, from Jonathan Mahoney, is how are we feeling about Peyton Bowen? So that's really the biggest storyline of, I guess, the week. He made some comments to Rivals, I believe, analyst Cole Patterson, I think, was the one who was there to see him this past weekend playing in his state tournament. And he indicated that he was going to make his final decision, which I know makes people cringe a little bit when you talk about final decision when the guy's been committed to Notre Dame since January 1st. But he wants to have that sort of sorted out before the in-home visits start, which that can start on Friday is the start of the contact period. I'm not sure yet exactly when Notre Dame is scheduled to make an in-home visit with Peyton Bowen. And a reminder to those who aren't familiar with the in-home visit rules, Notre Dame's assistant coaches, each recruit can get a visit from a coaching staff 6 times during the contact period. And so Notre Dame, for instance, so say Peyton Bowen, like Chris O'Leary, if they wanted to send him every week for 6 weeks, he could go there and visit him during the contact period. Now they could change coaches up as well, but the head coach can only do it once. Marcus Freeman can only make one in-home visit with every recruit. And so we'll see when Marcus Freeman's visit with Peyton Bowen gets lined up. We'll be working on reporting that to our Inside ND Sports subscribers on the Insider Lounge as the week progresses. So I don't know how to feel, frankly. I got a little bit probably more nervous about Notre Dame's chances than ever before, coming off of some of the optimism that Oklahoma sources seem to have after his most recent visit to Oklahoma. He visited Oklahoma after his last visit to Notre Dame, and so it wasn't like his recruitment has been shut down. And obviously, the comments he just made about having a final decision, he couldn't say that it still isn't shut down. So Notre Dame still likes where it's at, feels good about him, but I think if they're gonna, they can't really exhale until they get to him signing, because that's how sort of back and forth this recruitment has been, and him having the interest in visiting so many other schools. So we will see how that plays out, but as of right now, I think he will still stick in Notre Dame's class, and that gives me a good opportunity to plug. This week I will have my December class prediction for Notre Dame's 2023 class. I'll run through who I think Notre Dame will add by the early signing period here in the next couple of days. So make sure you're subscribed. And if you have missed it, we are running a Cyber Monday deal with Rivals. New subscribers can get access to Inside ND Sports for a full year for just $22. So sign up for that before midnight. The link is in the comment section. It should be pinned to the top. So just click that link, use promo code Rivals22, and you can get set up for a full year of our coverage for just $22. So hopefully that is something that intrigues you. And since I sort of segued us into questions, what do you got, Eric?
I was going to say, if you already have a subscription, go get one for a buddy. $22, they're going to think you spent a lot more than that on it.
You don't have to tell them how much you spent. Yeah.
If you have a friend that's at another school, a fan of another school, get them a Notre Dame subscription and make them mad, but they can actually get the content from the other sites.
Yeah, you can get content from other sites. You won't have access to the message boards, but you can also upgrade your subscription to get access to other message boards. So there are a number of options, and we have all that available to you on the Insider Lounge if you're looking for any of those extra details. All right, let's get to some of the other questions we have received from our viewers. The first one is from Andrew Cabanis, which we've already discussed a little bit, and I believe this is the Twitter account that referred to us as whose wife thought we were relatives. Andrew asks, what are the prospects for adding an edge rusher to the 2023 class and or via transfer?
Yeah, I think there should be a pretty good crop of them, because there's all different kinds of reasons that they would be in the portal, and not always because they're not playing. Some guys just want to play on a bigger stage and help their draft stock, and playing at Notre Dame would allow them to do that. And really, you are looking for a grad transfer type. You're looking for an experience. You're not looking for a project. And so I think there's going to be some really good options if Notre Dame decides to go down that road. Again, Justin Adamalola is waiting for his grade from the NFL draft people. Even if he comes back, you can make a case. You could still play him at that other end spot where he played most of the year, and still bring in somebody to rotate with Jordan Botelho and the young guys that you're trying to develop, like Josh Burnham, Junior Tuihalamaka. I know Aiden Gobira was at the other side, but Aiden's a guy that could probably play Viper as well.
Yeah, I just quickly on Justin, I would imagine there's more that goes into it than the grade he will get from the draft board or whatever.
You talked to him.
the term is. I just don't think he's going to get a grade that tells him to leave and go to the NFL draft.
Right.
Even though I like Justin as a player, I just don't think he had. We spoke to Mike Renner, Pro Football Focus's lead NFL draft analyst, and he said he just doesn't have the measurables that you would want, or the production that sort of overcomes those measurables, because he hasn't been a full-time starter at Notre Dame, and he would have the opportunity to do that next season if he came back. So I think he may still make the decision to leave, but I don't think it will be based on something that he would get from the grade process of the NFL. There's a name for the draft committee or what
it used to be called the NFL Advisory Board. It has a similar name.
Okay. But whatever he gets from that, I think they will do more. The Adamalola family will do more research than just that. So that was all I was trying to get at. Though I've said it in
They'll
much
be splitting up the
way.
Twins for the first time, though. If he,
they're probably going to either way, because I don't know that the same NFL team would bring him on. I don't know that it would be very strange that if both, although the Aquara brothers have been on the Lions for a couple years together now, so you never really know. They could end up in the same place. And so just to echo what you said, I think that the transfer portal is there. I don't know who the options are. I haven't heard any names necessarily yet.
But we'll start to hear them next Monday for sure.
We'll start to hear them here soon, and I think especially if Notre Dame's looking for grad transfers, we won't necessarily have to wait for that December 5th window for those guys to get in. So it could be guys. There could be guys this week that are noteworthy that Notre Dame could start looking at. It's just a matter of the timing of when those guys announce their intentions to hit the transfer portal. All right, next question is from Mike DeVoy. Drew Pine played well enough for Notre Dame to win if he hadn't turned the ball over twice and the refs called holding on the USC O-line at least every third hold. That said, he's a good backup. Agree.
Yeah, he played well enough to win other than the turnovers. I mean, his pass efficiency rating was astronomical. It was well over 200. It was higher than Caleb Williams actually for the game. But we could have mentioned this in the earlier segment. The question Notre Dame has to figure out too is what you want that quarterback to be. Do you need a quarterback that's more multidimensional than Drew is, like Caleb Williams? Did that game convince you that if you want to win playoff games, because you look at the other quarterbacks in the playoff and they all have rushed for around 200 yards or more. They all have a lot of rushing touchdowns. They all have at least 3 yards per carry. And Drew Pine doesn't have that. I think he ran the ball better than any of us thought he could. Now does he project as a backup? If he is a good backup and he's willing to accept that, yeah, I mean, he's a guy that can come in. We know now he can win a game for you. The question is, would he accept that role? And what if he was number 3 and not number 2? What if you brought in a grad transfer and either Tyler or the grad transfer was 1 and the other one was 2 and Drew Pine was 3? Then he might say, well, let me get my degree here and then go find some playing time next year, because I think he's fairly close. We haven't talked to him about it because it hasn't been an issue to this point. But that's I think he'd be a tremendous backup with 10 starts under his belt.
Yeah, I mean, like we said earlier, Drew Pine, I thought, played really well, other than the turnovers. And he has shown at times he can be really efficient with his passes. He can be accurate, but he's not consistent enough to, I think, overcome some of his shortcomings in terms of getting passes batted down, maybe not making the decisions consistently enough that you need to sort of maximize the passing game and the passing attack. And so, I mean, in a perfect world for Drew Pine, he'd have the ability to sort of continue to progress. I mean, and develop. College football years ago, you wouldn't just have like, okay, you were a 10-game starter, and then okay, that's it. Thanks again. Now you're our 3rd string quarterback next season. Like that would seemingly be unheard of. At least maybe I'm just being young and naive and saying that wouldn't happen to 20 years ago in college football that often, but that could genuinely happen now just because everything's now. The transfer portal exists. You can bring other guys in to compete and play right away. And so I think it would be tough for Drew to be in Drew Pine's shoes or say, hey, I went out there, I gave my all for this team. Yes, I didn't play my best always, but it wasn't for a lack of trying. He put everything he had into trying to lead Notre Dame to some wins this season and did that more often than not, even if it wasn't necessarily he wasn't the main reason Notre Dame won. But yeah, he's just for as well as Drew Pine played against USC, he was still 2 notches below the level that Caleb Williams was playing at, even if you can point to the passer efficiency ranking and rating and Drew Pine's being better than Caleb Williams. That to me, that doesn't necessarily measure. That's not a good enough measurement in terms of the quality of the quarterback play between the two. Now, obviously, Caleb Williams has the advantage of having better receivers to throw to, but I just don't think that they were necessarily in the same ballpark in terms of quarterbacks. And that's not intended to be a shot at Drew Pine. Caleb Williams is the Heisman Trophy winner this year. It hasn't been announced yet, but that is the outcome. There's no, I don't see it possible that it's not the case. So he just wasn't in the echelon, and I'm not sure that he's going to be how realistic of an opportunity he's going to be given to sort of take what he learned this season as a starter at Notre Dame and be able to be the starter for a second season at Notre Dame next year.
Well, and again, I do think it comes back to multidimensional. You know, Drew Pine can't dictate to a defense what it needs to do. They can dictate to him, and then he and Tommy Rees are going to have to adapt. Caleb Williams, because he could be USC's leading rusher if they wanted him to be, then Notre Dame had to play defense different. They couldn't put an extra player in the box because they had to protect their back end, which led them to get gashed in the run with the traditional running game. Had they been able to maybe have an 8th player in the box like USC was doing and 9th player, then you wouldn't have seen those kind of rushing numbers. And Ian Book and Deshaun Kaiser and some of these other quarterbacks that have played at Notre Dame, they have been able to force teams to do that. There have been games I can remember distinctly with Deshaun Kaiser against Clemson down there in the monsoon in 2015, where the traditional running game wasn't working and Deshaun Kaiser got involved, and then you had a numbers advantage. And so, the pass efficiency doesn't always tell the entire story of a quarterback's impact.
And those reasons are some of the reasons, if not most of the reasons, why Tyler Buchner was named the starter over Drew Pine. It was what he gave you in terms of being a dual threat quarterback and being able to present more difficulties for a defense to defend than potentially Drew Pine did. All right, next question is from We Are Not Marshall. What does ND do with Maris Leafau next year? We can't continue to watch what we saw all year from him. Jack Kaiser may need to be reevaluated as well.
Well, I think the whole linebacker position is fascinating. I thought Maris improved in the second half of the season. I think Jack Kaiser is a really good, from the standpoint he can play any of the linebacker positions. He's really good with play diagnosis, which makes him play faster than his foot speed. And yet, how does he fit in with all this athleticism that's coming up behind? I think Kaiser probably is a better inside linebacker than he is rover. I think what Notre Dame created the rover position to be isn't what Jack Kaiser is. And he would be the first to admit that. He cannot cover a slot receiver. And not all the rovers could do that, but Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah definitely could, and that made him incredibly valuable. And Notre Dame seems to feel that Jalen Sneed could turn into that kind of player. They're hoping Nolan Ziegler can turn into that kind of player. A high school safety and wide receiver could turn into that kind of player. And that's kind of how they're recruiting the position now. But you think about it, Bo Bauer's the only one that's out of eligibility. So you have those returning starters. You have these ascending players like Prince Colley and Jalen Sneed. You have Junior Tui Halamaka wanting to get in the mix, Nolan Ziegler. And then you look at the recruiting class. All three of those linebackers, Zinter, Drake Bowen, and Jaden Osbury, are early enrollees. And just looking at Drake Bowen as much as I have, he seems like a camera-ready guy to me that could at least be in the rotation. And so the linebacker competition is going to be fascinating. So the question is, we can't watch what we saw. They need to be reevaluated. I think everybody's up for evaluation. I think J.D. Bertrand probably is the only one that safely has his role as the middle linebacker.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Maris showed some things this season. I think he played at a high enough level all the time to be able to be like sort of unchallenged going into next season. And I think there just seems to be a lot more refining that needs to be done to his game to get him to play to his potential. And I don't know that we've seen that yet. So maybe there's lessons to be learned from this season that can be applied for him next year. I just think that he hasn't been able to make enough plays defensively in the positions he's been put. Like even as a blitzer, you'd think for the amount of times that Notre Dame would sort of send him, he would be more disruptive as a pass rusher, but he hasn't been. I think there was a thought that maybe he would be able to do that. So, I mean, if he were better at that, you're like, well, maybe he's someone that they could find like a Vipers sort of role for. But it's like, well, I don't know. If he's not a good blitzing linebacker, would that make him a better pass rush? Like, could he be a good pass rushing Viper? I don't necessarily know how I feel about it. I haven't seen enough and wouldn't have enough insight to make that guess. But I think I will say generally, anytime we talk to Al Golden about the linebacker play, he seemed to be more pleased with it than some folks who are Notre Dame fans are.
In fact, I almost offended him. I think I said, we're asking a lot what was wrong with the linebackers early in the season. Now what's going right with them? He's there. It was a problem earlier in the season.
So now I don't know. Like, is that Al Golden just defending those guys and covering up for them, or is that an honest reflection of his? How he thinks they played throughout the whole season? I don't know that I could give you the right answer for that, but certainly there's more on the bone there for Maris Leofau, and we'll see if Notre Dame can get that out of him. All right, next question is from Jay Dido. What do you think about Cade McNamara?
I think Notre Dame can do better.
Yeah,
and he's for people that don't know, he's Michigan's backup quarterback. He didn't play much this year. He was in a quarterback competition with J.J. McCarthy early in the year, lost that, and I think had a leg injury and really didn't play much after that, even in a reserve role. He initially was verbally committed to Notre Dame in the class that they ended up getting, I think, Brendan Clark. So he would be a grad transfer, but I think Notre Dame can do better than Cade McNamara in the portal.
Yeah, Cade McNamara is Michigan's Drew Pine. That's how I would classify him. And when I put it that way, I don't know that people were like, "Yes, bring him on." Like, That's who we want. I think he's not necessarily the same size as Drew Pine, so I'm not necessarily comparing their playing styles or games necessarily. But he was the guy that he was, his year as a starter was last season. He was able to not prevent Notre Dame from Michigan from getting to the playoff, but did so with a running game that really carried him in a lot of ways. He entered the season in a quarterback competition with Jim Harbaugh giving the first two games. Cade McNamara started one, and then JJ McCarthy started the other one. That was how they decided to carry out their quarterback competition. And JJ McCarthy ended up winning out, and he ended up having.
JJ McCarthy was a man in the Ohio State game. My goodness,
he was, and he wasn't necessarily like that all season. That was a needed performance for him, especially when Michigan was without its star running back Blake Corum, who tried to play and clearly was still compromised from his knee injury from the Illinois game. But Cade McNamara, it was reported today that he was entering the transfer portal, and so we'll see where he ends up. I think Iowa was a school that was sort of instantly linked to him. And we'll
good luck playing in that offense.
Right. But yeah, I mean, you could be an average quarterback and be a savior for Iowa's offense, right? I mean, they need anything they can get over there. So we'll see.
When half your offensive production is safety scored by the defense.
Yeah, times are bleak for the Iowa offense, but we'll see if that's where Cade McNamara ends up. That's just an early rumblings that were there, but I'm not sure that Notre Dame will be pushing very hard for Cade McNamara.
One guy that, I was looking at some national speculation on which of these quarterbacks we're going to end up wearing. A lot of them aren't in the portal yet. But how would you feel about Van Dyke from Miami ending up at Notre Dame?
I honestly haven't watched him very much, so I don't know that I would have opinion right now. I did not. Miami didn't play in many competitive football
that was
games.
Speculated. Yeah,
Miami didn't play in many competitive football games, so I was not watching them or seeking them out.
He was so good in 2021, and he really struggled with the new coaching staff this year.
Yeah, and I mean that
happens. I mean, Brennan Armstrong went from Virginia, was prolific in 21 and was in 2022.
Yeah, and NC State's Devin Leary had a injury this season, but even before that, I don't think he was playing as well as he had last year. So I think those are going to be the kinds of guys you'll see in the transfer portal, probably guys that whether it's injury related or performance related, and have like sort of that's what happened to Jack Cohn. He got hurt. Graham Mertz, the red carpet was rolled out for Graham Mertz to take over as the starting quarterback at Wisconsin and as the next big thing. And so Jack Cohn just said, well, let me get out of here and try to find something else and try to beat out the chosen one at quarterback at Wisconsin. And Notre Dame benefited from that. So we'll see what comes of that in terms of what are the realistic quarterback options for Notre Dame in the transfer portal. But like you said, like right now we're just speculating. We're talking about guys that haven't even entered the transfer portal yet. So it feels a little bit tough for like those kids that are in that situation. It's like, hey, maybe I want to stay at my own school. Stop talking about me that way. But that's the nature of the NCAA recruiting transfer portal. All right, next question from Roger Lancey. What is your evaluation of the defensive tackles for next year? Does ND have enough beef at defensive tackle to absorb blocks to free up linebackers and also get pushed for the pass rush?
I like some of the guys that are coming back. Howard Cross was productive. You need him in a rotation. There are certain teams he doesn't match up as well against because of his size, but he's so quick, so great with his hands. I like some of the younger guys. I like Tyson Ford and his potential as a defensive tackle. I think a big key is who is Aiden Keanu-Aina. He got to play in that Boston College snow globe game. And he had been hurt since the spring. He's a guy with some size. I mean, that's a 322 pounder. He's kind of your Lewis Nix-ish type nose guard if he has that kind of talent. We don't know because we haven't seen him play in that role, but he certainly has the size. You think about some of the guys that they're bringing in the recruiting class. There's not somebody that rises. I don't think, Tyler, that's going to be camera ready for them. They're going to be more developmental players. You figure Donovan Heinisch is going to turn into something at some point. And it's possible they could go to the portal and get somebody like they did with Chris Smith if they feel like they need to get more depth than they have. The question is Riley Mills going to play inside or out? And if he's an inside guy, I really like where they're going with that position. If they put him back out on the edge, then maybe they're like, Jacob Lacey, come back. Jacob is going to go to Oklahoma. He transferred after the fourth week, or he jumped into the portal as a grad transfer, and he's going to end up at Oklahoma.
Yeah, I think Riley Mills should be a defensive tackle.
I do too.
Next season, we didn't see enough out of him as a pass rusher at defensive end, in my opinion, to warrant that. I think you see Riley Mills as probably the starting defensive tackle next season. And then I do like Tyson Ford. I don't know if he's going to be ready to do that next year in terms of being the number 2 guy in that rotation. I would be curious. Like Howard Cross is the one that, like, I don't understand him, I guess, is the way. Like, I don't think he's a bad player. I don't understand why he's a better nose guard than a defensive tackle, and that has been sort of the role he's been asked to play. And I don't know if that's just because Notre Dame has needed him to play nose guard more than that's his best position. So I think that, I mean, we're going to see a lot of him next year. That's he's not going away. It's just a matter of, does he stay at nose guard? Does he play more defensive tackle? I like Gabe Rubio.
Oh, Gabe Rubio, yeah.
As a prospect, and Aiden Kiana-Aina, I think those are guys that are up and comers. And so we'll see what they can contribute. And Jason Anye, I mean, as weird as it sounds, someone so far buried on the depth chart, like, he showed some things in the spring that maybe, and I think maybe even into camp, it's like, okay, this might work long term for him. He's like a big time project in terms of, like, he put on a lot of weight, and getting the ability to play defensive tackle with that body as a kid that played defensive end in high school was something there. So I think that there's intriguing options there. I don't know that Notre Dame's, it's not going to be like the strength of Notre Dame's defense next season, I don't think. But we'll see how those guys continue to develop. Another one from Roger Lancey real quick is, any news on the concussion for Tobias Merriweather? It seems like being out 4 weeks is concerning.
I think, Tyler, you got some inside information in that he was improving, and I would imagine he's going to be ready for the bowl. I don't think this is a scary situation. And Notre Dame's had some of those before with players that, and it went beyond concussion stuff. It ended up being diagnosed as something else. But I think there's a lot of optimism that Tobias is going to play in the bowl game. But
to be clear, when you're talking about diagnosed something else, you're not talking about Tobias Merriweather. You're talking about past instances, right?
Yeah, it was like Danny Spond.
Right. I just wanted to clear that up, because I was like, well, that's not what I know about Tobias Merriweather.
Yeah. Other players that I can remember,
right. He had suffered a concussion, and the symptoms were, I think came on a little bit later. They weren't like immediate and right away. And so I think that that was something that was concerning for Notre Dame, and they've just been really careful with getting him back. I think partially because of that, and just the way he's responded and gone through his recovery. So I think it's just out of precaution. I don't think it's a long-term concern. It obviously it isn't like one, like, okay, concussion, you're out a week and then you're back the next week. It has been more than that, but they're being careful with him, which I think is the responsible thing to do with a concussion injury. And yeah, I think he was getting better going into last week. I think someone had coined it, like, said he was like 90% or something like that. I think that was a number that was given to me. But it doesn't matter. He wasn't cleared, but I do think he will be cleared in time to practice for the bowl, and then obviously play in the bowl as well. Last, more of a comment than a question here, is from Carlos Mayfield. Lincoln Riley had a great plan with the pooch punt to keep Notre Dame special teams on the sideline to prevent blocked punts. And I just wanted to say I agree with that. I thought that was actually a pretty savvy move. Obviously Notre Dame had the ability to put Brandon Joseph back there to catch the punt, and did that once, but
and Herbie blew it on that too.
yeah.
Did you hear about that?
I did. Yeah. Kirk Herbstreit said, well, he's not normally their punt returner. It's like, well, actually he is. So that was an unfortunate mistake there for Kirk Herbstreit. So maybe being both a college football and NFL announcer on a weekly basis is taking its toll on him.
I mean, just a quick thing. I had a chance to talk with him this week, and I think he's awesome. I know a lot of people don't like him, but I think his knowledge is incredible. But I did notice from interviewing him when he didn't have as full of a plate and wasn't bouncing back between the NFL, I thought he was better prepared when he didn't have both things to do.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, there's only so many hours in a day, so much time in a week.
If you ask me an NFL question, I'll just say, ask Tyler the Bears questions.
Sometimes I feel like I know more about the NFL than I do about other college football teams that aren't Notre Dame or aren't on Notre Dame's schedule, just because I actually can sit down and watch them on Sundays, whereas on Saturday we're pretty preoccupied with what we're doing with covering Notre Dame. So That's it for all the questions we have, Eric.
Boy, and thank you. This has been the best question queue we've had. We've finally figured it out. So we appreciate all the questions that we didn't get to, because there's some good ones.
Yeah, so let's hit on a couple more things before we wrap up. I'll let you choose where we want to go with that, Eric. But I'm thinking.
Well, let's get into a little bit of the USC game.
Okay.
Some key numbers. So Notre Dame lost 38-27. The 38 points is the most Notre Dame had given up this year. They were outgained 436-408. 436 again, the most Notre Dame had given up this season. Really, the shocking stat to me was the rushing differential from a team that wasn't a particularly great rushing team and was a pretty average rushing defense. USC won that battle 204-90. They really kind of out Notre Dame in some areas. They held the plays down. USC only ran 61. Notre Dame even less, 52. The average in a game is 65-67 nationally. Really good numbers for Notre Dame in terms of yards per play, 7.8. That's incredible. 7.1 for USC. Big difference was turnovers 2-0, and you could really make that 3 with the turnover on downs deep in USC territory. And Notre Dame's got to get better on fourth downs. They were 40% this season, and they were 40% in their losses. That's about 105th in the country in fourth down conversions. Georgia and Michigan, which are the number 1 and 2 teams in the country, they're in the high 80s in their fourth down conversions. The time of possession was big in USC's favor. Both teams converted their third downs like crazy. And again, that fourth down conversion rate was a big problem for Notre Dame. Anything jump out at you in there that I didn't monopolize?
I mean, you hit a lot of the things. One that wasn't a box score thing, but it jumped out at me in terms of the Pro Football Focus stuff was Notre Dame's tackling grade on defense was 31.5. 63.4 was the previous low for Notre Dame throughout the season, and that was against Ohio State. So that's sometimes you take your leave the PFF grades, but I think that checked out. Like Notre Dame's defense did not tackle well, whether it was Caleb Williams, whether it was Austin Jones, who rushed for 154 yards. And USC's offense was 8 of 12 on third down. I talked going into the game that Notre Dame had an opportunity to do well with its own offense on third down, and it did. It was 5 of 7, but USC's offense was pretty good on third down as well, and good on most downs, quite frankly. But for Notre Dame to have 7.8 yards per play and not be able to pull out a win, that's speaks to the turnovers, but more importantly, it spoke to the poor defensive performance that just from the get-go, Notre Dame was sort of forced to play catch up, and you would like to think that 1 3-and-out to start the game on offense wouldn't be like a death knell, but it sort of felt like it was, even though that wasn't necessarily the case, because Notre Dame's offense did come to life after a slow start, because USC was able to get out to a 10-0 lead pretty easily and pretty quickly. I mean, that is not the kind of team you want to try to play from behind, especially with the way Notre Dame's offense has evolved so far.
Well, and if USC couldn't run the ball and Caleb Williams couldn't sustain his 80-some% completion rate, then that might have been an issue. But they kind of sat on the ball and shortened the game once they had a 2-score lead.
Yeah, it was what USC did, not in the same way, but I think that was sort of the game plan that Notre Dame would have liked. If Notre Dame could have jumped out to a 10-0 lead and just run the ball a lot, that was the ideal for Notre Dame, and it sort of played out the other way around.
Another thing that I think is significant in this, I know people are mad and they want assistant coaches fired and stuff, and I get that. It's the arch rival too, but Notre Dame was going into the Clemson victory this year, was 2-23 in top 5 in its last 25 top 5 games, and so that was win number 3. But a lot of those were never even close, especially during the Brian Kelly era. A lot of those big state games, and really when you look at the top 5 games they played this year, they were in the game in the fourth quarter at Ohio State. They won the Clemson game going away, and they were really in this game, even though it felt like at times they weren't. But, when Drew Pine threw the interception, they were driving to make it a one-score game in the fourth
Right.
quarter. So I think there is advancement there. And you look at those games and you always try to measure your program and say, what are they missing? And I know somebody in the Insider Lounge said, I think I've seen this movie before. They're, quarterback position, wide receivers, and cornerbacks. And yet I think the difference here is the bet that Jack Swarbrick made on Marcus Freeman, that he could go out and get those players. And really, when you look at this recruiting class, they have 3 top 150 rivals, wide receivers. They have 2 top 150 cornerbacks. They have a very intriguing quarterback prospect. He's not a top 150 guy, but I think he's a high ceiling guy potentially in Kenny Minchie with a different skill set. So I think Notre Dame is moving in the right direction in those areas where it is lacking.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think if I had to compare the game, the USC game to another big game in recent past from Notre Dame, maybe the 2019 Georgia game where Notre Dame was in that game and had a chance to win it. And they weren't necessarily outclassed. It wasn't like Notre Dame didn't belong on the field with that team. And I don't know that anyone expected this game to feel like USC was in another stratosphere than Notre Dame, but it didn't feel that way. Notre Dame was there. It was clear what Notre Dame needed to sort of be in a better position, and sort of just re-emphasize some of the issues that we've seen from Notre Dame this season, and that those sort of came to light again against USC. And I think will be informative in terms of how Notre Dame wants to continue to build this program.
We're running into overtime. Do we have anything else we want to get to?
I think we've covered pretty much everything. I don't know that there's a lot more that needs to be said. I think we had a good turnout tonight. I appreciate all the questions and the viewers and comments. So I'd like, if we can make it work, I'd like us to do another one next week. We haven't really discussed that, but I think we would have been planning to do these post games, but maybe we can put another one out there next Monday. We will let people know either way, and obviously
we can talk about the bowl matchup and some other things that are going on with recruiting and portal stuff.
Yeah, so I think that can potentially work for us next Monday, but we will let you know either way. And make sure you're subscribed to our Inside Indy Sports channel here, because then
That's important. A lot of you, our audience is growing, but the more you guys subscribe, the better it helps us.
Absolutely.
And that's free.
Yeah,
the $22 thing is a great deal, but this is free.
This is free. This just requires a click. that's the only thing it costs you. Yeah. So like this video, continue your discussions about the game in the comments. We appreciate that. And we'll be back with some more YouTube coverage for you. And if you are new to us in general, visit us at InsideIndySports.com. And like we mentioned, we new subscribers can sign up by midnight for a full year for just $22 to have all of the access to our insider content, our analysis, our recruiting coverage, and all kinds of things you'll want to know going into the offseason for Notre Dame. And then obviously that'll even cover you through next year's regular season. So that's a lot of coverage coming from us that you can get for just $22. So we appreciate everyone for tuning in, and have a good week.